everybody, and welcome to the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. My name is Kelton Hell.
And I'm Spencer Simpson. This week is the final episode of our Power Level series, and we are talking about deck building with power levels in mind.
I'm so excited. I can't believe that we are at the end of this series. It's been so fun. We've been looking forward to doing this for so long, and this is really the episode that brings it all together and really uses all of the pieces that we've been talking about to start building decks.
Yeah, the past couple episodes, we started off with our deck building philosophy. Please go back and listen to the last 4 episodes, I think it is, where we talk about our deck building philosophy, and we talked about things like interaction, ramp, and card advantage, and how they affect the power level of your deck. And so today we're going to be putting that all together, and we're going to be discussing how to build your deck to a specific power level with those things in mind.
Yeah, so to recap briefly, our power levels are an attempt to move away from the traditional 1 to 10 scale, which is very quantitative, towards a more qualitative or descriptive system that helps us have more productive rule zero conversations and can really act as a target for deck building.
Yeah, so as a reminder, our power levels are broken into 5 categories: low, low mid, mid, high mid, and high. And as a reminder, low being probably pre-con level for the most part, and high being your most powerful casual decks that you're going to see. Not CEDH. CEDH is completely off the scale. This is just casual decks.
Yeah, we're not going to dive into these into much detail. We already did that in another episode. Go watch that episode. It's great. So we've taken the factors that we feel largely affect these power levels and condensed them into some quick questions that you can ask yourself or other players at the table to determine where a deck falls on this scale. And those questions are: how dense and efficient is your interaction? How dense and fast is your ramp? How efficient is your card advantage? How fast is your mana base? How dense and efficient are your combos? And how friendly is your strategy? Which includes things like what turn are you trying to win on and how are you trying to win?
Right, because a deck that's going to win through a combo is probably inherently higher power and is going to be looking for that combo than a deck that's going to be looking for a win through combat damage. Even if you don't have tutors for that combo and you can just like incidentally find one, that is going to make your deck at least inconsistent.
Yeah, and that's because those kinds of decks rely on the other decks at the table having enough interaction to be able to deal with an infinite combo.
Yeah, exactly. One of the prerequisites of our power levels is that we are building it to a specific power level to consistently play at that power level, which is what makes those first 3 questions especially useful when determining the power level of your deck. So those first 3 were about interaction, ramp, and card advantage. And the next one is about mana base, so the first 4. And those 4 things are really what make up your quote-unquote vegetables in a deck. Your interaction, your ramp, your card advantage, and your mana base. Every deck needs to run these to be able to function appropriately. And need to be running enough, especially of all of them, to make sure that your deck can function consistently as well.
Yeah, so we did videos to break down each of those vegetables: interaction, ramp, and card advantage. And we'll do a quick recap here in terms of density and in some instances, quality of cards for those vegetables. So to start off with interaction, the power level does affect both the density and the quality of the interaction that you're running. For lower power levels, you're looking at 8 to 12 interaction pieces. For mid-level, you're looking for 12 to 16 interaction pieces, and at higher levels you're really looking for like 16 to 20 interaction pieces. And to learn more about card examples, specific card examples, and card quality, you can check out the other episode.
Yeah, check out our episode, Interaction by Power Levels. And like Kelton said, the reason you're running more at higher powers is because you do need to be able to interact more frequently and more effectively, right? So you're running
with
more
bigger threats.
With bigger threats, yeah, exactly. Because someone could outright win the game with a combo just out of nowhere, and you need to have something to be able to interact with that. Yep. The next category here is ramp, which power level primarily with ramp affects quality, we found, and less so density, but it can affect density depending on how it mostly the colors you're playing in your commander. If your commander's 5 color, if you're trying to make your deck higher power, you'll be running more ramp to be able to get those colors more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in general, how much ramp should you be running? The lowest is 10. The optimal is 13 to 16, and really just 13 unless you have a reason to be running more. And the highest amount of ramp that you'd ever really want to run is about 20. You actually start to lose advantage after about 20 ramp pieces. So where power level doesn't affect density very much, the answer is most of the time around 13.
Yeah, around 13. And like you said, 13 to 16, 16 is definitely on the high end, and you need a good reason to be doing that. And we said 20 here because in our analysis, that is where you actually start to have a marginal loss in value. And so 20 is like the absolute maximum you should ever run for the most part.
But regardless of power level, barring any like strategic reason, you should probably be running about 13. That's what the numbers say.
Yep, absolutely. And the last one here is card advantage. And with card advantage, power level primarily affects the quality of card advantage you're playing. You should be playing as much card advantage as you need to. We have found that number to be similar to ramp, 10 at least, at very least 10, and 11 if you're playing some sort of smoother to help you get, that can give you a little bump in the amount you're going to see. But 13 to 16 is probably going to be sufficient. And there's really no good reason to include more than 16.
Yep, exactly. And in terms of card advantage, what's going to vary most between power levels is just the what constitutes card advantage in your deck. At lower power levels, it's mostly going to be smoothers and refillers. For mid-level, you're looking at mostly refillers and engines. And in high power decks, you pretty much only want engines for the most part, the most efficient engines.
Yeah, you're just playing the best card draw that's available to you.
Yep.
And sometimes that might mean smoothers and refillers if you're playing like fewer colors, but you're just playing the best stuff at higher power levels. Yep. So because we've gone through these lists of these different vegetables and we crave the order to be able to create decks and not have to do it from scratch every time, it led us to creating our own little deck building template. Now, a disclaimer about this is that it's not the end-all be-all of deck building. This is just a guide. It's not how every deck should look. It's more of like a starting point for when you're building a deck.
Yeah, and I always find this really useful. I know that I've relied on the Command Zones deck building template in the past. It's been a really good starting place, and that's exactly what it is. It's a starting place. It's to get you thinking in terms of numbers and categories and making sure that you're not missing anything. And so what we've assembled here is a pretty solid guide for building a mid-power deck, which, you know, according to the bell curve, the majority of decks likely are going to be, and this probably constitutes the average deck at a table that's playing a lot of homebrew commander decks. And so this template starts with one commander or two, if you're running a partner or a background, 36 lands, 13 ramp, 13 interaction, 13 card draw or card advantage pieces, and then 24 deck-specific cards. There's a little bit of wiggle room in those numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we said, this can be arranged depending on what your deck wants specifically. If your commander is ramping you, then maybe you run a little bit less ramp. If your commander is just a low mana value, and maybe you run a little less ramp as well. If you have card draw in the command zone, that can probably affect how much draw you want to play. There are lots of factors that can do this. But this is a general good starting place. And actually, we're going to share an example of a deck that I built recently that fits into this pretty. I mean, I obviously was trying to fit it into this, but it plays pretty well having fit into this as a mid-power deck.
And very consistently as a mid-level deck.
Yeah, absolutely. With the exception of maybe like some power level outliers, which we're going to talk about as well.
So
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, at this point, you may be thinking, 24 deck-specific cards, only 24. That's not enough. You're playing too many ramp. You're playing too much interaction. You're playing too much card advantage. What do you think about that, Spencer?
So 24 cards is a lot of cards, right?
Yeah.
I think it's easy to look at, say, oh, only a quarter of your deck is contributing to, like, is theme-specific stuff. And first of all, that's not what we're saying in any way.
Yep.
What we're saying is 24 of your cards are exclusively theme-specific stuff, right?
Yep.
So if your deck is a +1/+1 counter deck, 24 of your cards care exclusively about +1/+1 counters.
Yeah,
right?
so when we talk about deck-specific cards, these might be things like advantage engines outside of card draw or early ramp, things like win cons or payoffs, thematic or synergistic pieces, and then just fun stuff that you just want to play in the deck. It's stuff that doesn't strictly contribute to your vegetables.
Yeah, and so those 24 cards actually turns into more than you think, especially at lower power levels, because you will be playing a lot of cards that fill multiple roles in your deck. So you might have, again, if we're going to take +1/+1 counters as the example, you might have a card that cares about +1/+1 counters, but is drawing you cards when you're placing +1/+1 counters on things, right? And so that not only contributes to your strategy and doesn't count towards the 24 deck-specific cards, but counts towards deck-specific cards in general, and counts towards your card advantage pieces. And so it gets to double count in that way. And so you're not locked into playing only 24 cards that care about your strategy, especially at low to mid powers.
Yeah, those decks are mostly going to be very thematic, even in the vegetables. They're going to choose vegetables that fit into the theme or the synergy of the deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you get to higher powers, like we said, you're playing the best versions of effects, and naturally those are less thematic. And so you will have fewer cards that fit your theme. 24 probably pretty close to at the highest power levels, right?
Yeah, like Rhystic Study is a very powerful card that shows up in a lot of high-powered decks, not particularly thematic for any kind of theme other than just drawing cards.
Yeah, whereas a card like in an Aristocrat style deck where you're sacrificing a bunch, a card that draws you cards as creatures die, fits both kind of in both camps. In the Venn diagram, it is in the middle.
Yes, absolutely. So with this guideline, with this template, there's really a couple of ways to go about building your deck in relation to a power level. And the first one is to just build your deck and then evaluate it. We've given you these questions. All of the videos dive into evaluating vegetables at power levels and things like that. This is probably what we recommend the least. It's not actually building around power levels. You're just using the scale to determine the power level of a deck when you're done building it. And that's fine. But the deck may not end up at the power level you think it will. And it can be harder to evaluate if you're doing it after the fact. And it's harder to change.
Yeah, I will say this is, I think, what we did with our deck building for the most part early on.
Sure.
Even though we weren't thinking in this same power levels paradigm that we now have.
Yeah.
We were just slotting in cards that we wanted to play. And as a result, in blue decks, I was playing Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora.
In every blue deck.
In every blue deck, right?
Yeah.
Because you start just slotting them in. And what happens is you start building decks that are all very similar at a power level of the cards you like to play, which is not a bad thing, but we found it's very nice to have a range of power levels of decks and be very intentional. So now if I want to build a deck at a 4 or high mid, and again, I'm going to reiterate, we'll use numbers sometimes as shortcuts here, but that is shortcuts for the qualitative values of low, mid, high.
Which is 1 through 5.
Which is
low, mid, high, mid, and high.
Exactly. So if I'm building a deck at a 4 on our scale, high, mid, I will probably include Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora in my blue deck because I want to have more powerful draw engines.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the second way to go about deck building. That is to set a goal, say I want to build a high mid deck, and then build to that. And we found that this is a much better guide when trying to build your deck to a specific power level because you end up with the deck that you want and the deck that you're looking to play in a specific pod or to be able to fit in at, any given table at that specific power level.
Yeah, it really educates each card inclusion, right, that you put in the deck. Because as you are putting a card in, you can think, well, how will this perform? And sometimes you won't know. So this actually, I think, is the harder version of deck building, right? Because you build a deck and you're trying to build it to a power level, but you don't really know until you've played it. And so it requires a lot of iteration.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first one's easy because it asks nothing of you. You just build the deck and then you evaluate it. And this one is asking a lot of you. It's asking you to evaluate every card inclusion to see how is it contributing to your overarching goal of building a deck at a specific power level. And in some way, it's cool that it acts as a guide to help you make those decisions, right? If you're building a low mid deck, the decision is practically made for you that you're not going to be playing Rhystic Study. That's a card that belongs in higher power decks. And so that's unless there's, like I said, there's not really a thematic reason to be playing it, but if maybe there's some very narrow, fringe reason why you might be playing it in that deck, for the most part, it's helping you make that decision for you as to which cards you might be including. But you are having to evaluate every card against that rubric.
Yeah, and that evaluation does take time. Like you can look at a card and you can look at it in relation to other cards and think about how that might work.
Yeah.
But in reality, what that takes is a lot of goldfishing and playtesting and reevaluating. The deck we're going to be talking about today, which is my Wilhelt the Rotcleaver deck, which we've mentioned several times in the episodes, has gone through a lot of those iterations, and I've played it and had a friend play it now multiple times at multiple commander events that we've had, and have been able to see which cards potentially are overperforming in the deck and underperforming and make some cuts as necessary.
Yeah, and we'll go through that deck list together. We'll also post a link to the Moxfield list in the show notes. But it's a difficult process because, like you said, it takes time. And so it's a lot of gold fishing. It's a lot of looking at cards. It's a lot of reevaluating. It's just a lot of playing. You're most of the time not going to hit that target right on the first time. And that's because cards are so hard to evaluate in a vacuum. Just reading the text on a card is so difficult to evaluate, especially when you need to see how it works with the synergy of the rest of the deck. And you just talked about Wilhelt the Rotcleaver. That is a zombie typal deck. And there's so much synergy going on in the deck that a card that, at first glance may look, just like very mid, not necessarily very powerful, can overperform in that synergy.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And what that can do sometimes is it can lead to your deck maybe performing at a higher power level than you think as part of your evaluating. And that can be an issue. Like, what if your deck is you're trying to build it a 3, it turns into a 3.5 when it's performing, right?
Yeah.
How do you fix that problem? How do you even know if that's happening?
Yeah, that's frustrating. If you're trying to build a mid-power deck, and you play at a table with other mid-power decks, and maybe your win percentage is a little higher than the rest of the decks, and it's a little harder for everyone else to deal with your deck, or maybe you frequently turn into the arch enemy, but it's not a deck that could be at a high mid table. It wouldn't be able to perform there. That's a problem, and that's the 0.5 problem that you're talking about. Like, it's performing at a 3.5, and you might be experiencing that problem if there is a surplus of power level outliers in your deck. If there are cards that are heavily weighting your deck towards one end of the power level spectrum, or if it synergizes more heavily than you thought it was going to.
Yeah, well, I think in the essence of full transparency, as working on these power level allies, we were building decks, or power level discussions, we were building decks, and I was working on reevaluating my Wilhelt the Rotcleaver deck, and Kelton was working on building his Brago King Eternal deck.
Yep.
And we would take these to our play groups, and we would play them, and they both did well, but it did feel like Brago was Wilhelt was maybe performing at around a 3.5. We were putting it just between mid and high mid, but certainly wasn't high mid for the purposes of like some other decks that I feel are high mid power level decks.
Yep.
And Brago was performing at, we thought, a 3 or a 2.5 maybe. It was really hard to know which one was actually mid, and what it felt like is they were both just on either side of mid, but not necessarily at a low mid 2 or a high mid 4.
Yeah, and it's been very fun to work on these decks. They have been our guinea pigs. We've been through so many iterations of these decks over the past few weeks and months because we have been working on them in preparation for this content. And so when it comes down to it, you may find it out in deck building. You may be building your deck and be like, oh goodness, this is actually starting to look a little more powerful than I intended, or it's not looking powerful enough. But more often than not, I really think you're not going to know until you play it. And that's why playtesting and gold fishing to some degree, but really actually just playing at a table is so important.
Yeah, I think with Brago specifically, one thing we ran into is you were trying to avoid playing instants and sorceries, right, in the deck because you're like, I wanted to be permanent-based removal. And then we decided that was bad, so you put some back in and took out some of the more mean versions. But then it made it feel like Brago was kind of just spinning its wheels and not doing much. And so it really is pretty repetitive playtesting as well, right? Because you have to see, you have to get reps on the deck. And you don't, in gold fishing, it's easy to say, oh, my deck just pops off. It's crazy. This is this is an amazing
drawing
deck.
1,000 cards every game.
Cards on turn 5. I mean, that's how Brago felt, though, right?
Yeah.
Is in a goldfish, by turn 5, it was like, oh my gosh, you just had 11 mana on turn 5 and drew 6 cards. Whereas, like, in an actual game, it was play Brago, and then someone else
removed.
Someone removes Brago because they know what Brago can do, right?
Yeah.
And so it really does take playtesting with a group to know what that's like. And really, this is why having a target for deck building is important, because you can have that target while you're building your deck, and then also have that target after, like as like a post game evaluation, right after you've played with people as well.
And not post one game, but post a lot of games, because you need to see over a period of time how well your deck is performing.
It's really tempting. I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off there. It is really tempting to play a game and be like, this card sucks. I'm taking it out of my deck. I've definitely felt that way before. And sometimes that's true. Like a card that's not doing what you want in a vacuum, maybe you want to take it out. But you got to give your deck a couple chances.
Absolutely. And the last thing I would say about decks that feel like they're performing at the wrong or the slightly wrong power level is the deck might just not want to be at that power level. And when I was building the first sliver, as I was building it, I thought, this deck wants to just be like a high mid deck. It wouldn't be fun to play at a lower power, nor would other people have fun playing against it at a lower power. The deck the commander and the composition of the deck, the way I was building it, really wanted to be at a specific power level. So that helped me make my decision and change my target to what it is now, which is a high mid deck. And it's way more fun to play, and it performs very well at that power level.
Having played against it, it's just far too resilient, right? To play at a low mid power where people are playing significantly less resilient or efficient effects, right? Whereas the first sliver is just incredibly efficient if it sticks on board.
Yeah, it's efficient because even if it gets removed, it rebuilds just so quickly. And the way I wanted to build the deck was really focused on top deck manipulation, which is a very fun and powerful effect. And you can run a lot of very fun and powerful cards that create that effect. And so it's something that just naturally slots in at a higher power level.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So what we wanted to do as the kind of capstone for this episode was go through a specific deck and do a little walkthrough about how we feel this fits in a specific power level. And the one we're talking about today is my Wilhelt the Rotcleaver deck, which is affectionately titled Aberzombie and Lich.
Such a
huge shout out to Kelton. I originally had named this deck Aberzombie and Fitch because I thought that was really funny. And Kelton gave me a phone call not 20 minutes later to say, Spencer, I think that's so funny. I'm going to yes and you should definitely be calling this Aberzombie and Lich.
That was a great little
it was a good alley-oop.
Improv moment, yeah.
It was a really good alley-oop to Kelton for the slam dunk on that one. So let's walk through it a little bit. This deck, the goal of this deck has been to be at a mid power level. So we've intentionally not included some more powerful effects, like your free counter spells or free interaction and stuff like that, your Rhystic Studies, your Mystic Remoras, some of the more powerful versions, and try to make it much more thematic. And it turns out sometimes that's also a little difficult, like we were talking about, that sometimes the synergy that you get in playing a theme can push you towards higher power levels without intending to. So, what I want to start off with is talking about the card totals in each category, just as a quick little backup for our deck building template. Wilhelt the Rotcleaver has 100 cards in it because it's a commander deck and has one commander. Let me read Wilhelt really quick, I think, just to kick us off. So Wilhelt the Rotcleaver is 2 blue-black for a 3/3 legendary creature zombie warrior with, whenever another zombie you control dies, if it didn't have Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. For those who don't remember, a Decayed zombie can't block, and when it attacks, you sacrifice it at the end of combat. And then Wilhelt also says, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice a zombie. If you do, draw a card. Mm-hmm. So, the play pattern of this deck is to play a lot of zombies, and then sacrifice them to get Decayed zombies, and then sacrifice those Decayed zombies, generate a bunch of value, draw a bunch of cards.
Yeah, this deck does draw a lot of cards. It is Dimir. It's going to be drawing a lot of cards. Yeah. But for a zombie deck, it just something that you just consider a typal deck where, you're just jamming a million zombies. You're just trying to overrun the board with zombies. You are, but you're also generating a ton of advantage while doing it.
Yeah, the thing I like about Wilhelt is you do have to have zombies to sacrifice, right? But if you've had one zombie out prior to playing Wilhelt, you at least get to draw cards over 2 turns if Wilhelt survives, right? Because you sacrifice that zombie, get a Decayed zombie, sacrifice that next zombie, draw another card. And you draw at end step. So it's basically a 4 mana Sack Outlet, Token Creator, Phyrexian Arena, right? It's
Yeah.
except it's drawing you at end step, which is nice.
And you are running a lot of very cheap zombies, so you can get a zombie out very easily before you play Wilhelt.
Yeah, the goal is to at least get out one. I might have to adjust, honestly, the number of that because sometimes it is hard to get a zombie out, but it is a controlling deck. And so I'm not trying to rush out Wilhelt by any means. Like, playing him turn 3 isn't necessarily the play pattern of this deck. It's you're trying to get set up and then get some refill your hand over the course of some turns with Wilhelt.
I've noticed that when you've played it, that you're not always in a rush to get Wilhelt.
Yeah, you can slow roll a little bit with this one. So, if we're talking about numbers in categories, we'll start with interaction. This deck runs 15 pieces of interaction, 13 pieces of ramp, and 13 pieces of card advantage, and then 25 cards that are exclusively deck specific.
And I will say, notably, Wilhelt is also card advantage in the command zone.
Yes. Yep. So it does run 14 total. I bumped it up to 13 though because it was running like 9 or 10 before, and even with Wilhelt in the command zone, that felt insufficient.
Yeah, I've noticed that when you play this deck, you draw a lot of cards when you get those pieces out, but when you don't, I mean, you can run dry pretty easily. But there are a few very efficient card advantage pieces in the deck, and those are what draw you a lot of cards. But I'm glad that you've added more since then to just keep your deck running smoothly.
Yeah, I did add a few more smoothers and a few more refillers in the deck, just because it can run dry, and not all of them are as particularly efficient or quick draw, right?
And did you mention how many lands you're running? 36 lands.
Oh, sorry, yes, 36 lands. I'm running 36 lands in the deck, trying to keep it. It originally was running 34 or 35, I think, total. So 36 lands. I should clarify. It is 35 actual lands, and then one of them is an MDFC, Malakir Rebirth, which is on the front side. You can pay 1 for an instant, choose a creature. You lose 2 life until end of turn. That creature gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. Very great because you get another ETB and you get to save a creature. And on the backside, it is a tapped land that taps for black.
Yep.
But I include that in land here because if I have 2 lands in Malakir Rebirth in hand, it's kind of a last ditch. Well, I do have a third land. Technically, it'll just enter tapped on whatever turn I play it.
Yeah. I like looking at your deck list because, we talked earlier about how 24 deck specific cards can seem like very few, but and you're running 25 deck specific cards. However, you have 30 zombies in the deck. So that means that zombies are filling some of those other roles because you have other deck specific cards in here that are not zombies.
Yes, that is one thing I wanted to talk about with this deck is there are 25 cards in the deck that are exclusively deck specific, right? That are exclusively zombies or care about zombies in some way, buff zombies, create zombie tokens. A fair amount of these cards are zombies. I do have, I think, 30 zombies in the deck. I think last time we counted, though, there are 40 cards in this deck, give or take, 1 or 2, that care about zombies or contribute to the strategy in some way outside of ramp, card advantage, or interaction.
That's cool.
But also double as those effects, right? And so there's a lot of overlap, and that's especially easy in typal decks, right? Because anything that's a zombie, I'm saying, okay, cool, that's part of the strategy and can be interaction. But you do get that overlap, which is really nice. I think an example of that would be like Undead Augur, which one of my favorites in the deck. Undead Augur is black, for a 2/2 creature zombie wizard. Whenever Undead Augur or another zombie you control dies, you draw a card and lose a life.
That's
so
cool.
Just great card draw. This one is especially good in this deck because it's not non-token.
Yeah,
so
it triggers off the decayed zombies too.
It's really, really good. So if I get Undead Augur out, so say I get Undead Augur and another zombie and Wilhelt out, at end of turn, I'm drawing 2 cards each turn.
Yeah.
Which is, just very good rate for this deck to refill and get a lot of card advantage. And this deck is a control deck for the most part. So it's trying to generate a lot of advantage, get stuff in the graveyard, recur it.
It feels weird to play against because, you do have a lot of interaction pieces in here, but a lot of those are zombies. It feels weird to play against a creature deck that is a control deck. Like, it plays control through its creatures, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think probably the best example of that, and one that we probably consider a fringe power level outlier in the deck.
Yeah.
Is Noxious Ghoul. So Noxious Ghoul is 3 black for a 3/3 creature zombie. Whenever Noxious Ghoul or another zombie comes into play, wow, not even under your control.
Yeah.
So that's crazy. All non-zombie creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn.
Yeah. So this is one of those cards where if you just look at the card outside of the deck, it doesn't look too powerful. It's 5 mana. It's on a creature. It's only -1/-1. But inside of a zombie typal deck, this card goes wild. And so many times when we've played against this deck, you're able to get multiple zombies out every turn. And it is effectively a one-sided board wipe every turn. It is so impossible to get things to stick on the board.
Yeah, well, baseline when you play it, it gives everything minus. Okay, baseline is -1/-1, but for the most part, you have out another zombie that Wilhelt can sacrifice, and it's until end of turn. So at the end step, end of turn effects haven't ended. You sacrifice a zombie and create a 2/2 decayed zombie. Noxious Ghoul sees that and gives everything else -1/-1 again. So baseline for the most part, it's -2/-2, which is a pretty respectable.
Out a lot of stuff on a
very respectable board wipe, especially like tokens. Like it effectively eliminates everyone's tokens that they've gotten out, creature tokens.
All non-zombie.
All non-zombie creature tokens. But it does, but I mean, for the most part, I'm not playing like a mirror match against another zombie deck.
No.
So it's effectively a one-sided board wipe and performs very well in this deck. And is another example of, that's very synergistic and fits the theme of your deck, very thematic. So in addition to those 24 deck-specific cards that I'm playing, you get Noxious Ghoul that also counts as interaction in the deck.
Yep. So you've already mentioned that this might be a power level outlier. What are some of the just kind of mid-power cards that fit into like a general example of the power level that the deck is looking to play at?
Yeah, so the reason I consider this mid is because it does play some more effective versions of. I'm going to start with interaction because in Dimir, you're kind of locked into the ramp that you can play. And so I play a range between 1 and 3 mana rocks in the deck to help ramp.
Which is generally just what we consider ramp. We're only mostly looking at early ramp pieces when we talk about ramp.
Yep, exactly. And as far as card advantage, I'm not playing like the most broken versions of card advantage for the most part. There are some pretty good ones in there, which I'll talk about. But it mostly is middle of the road. But I think an interaction shows a lot of the. Interaction is where I tend to at least power creep because I want to play very efficient interaction, and having a 1 mana or 2 mana at end of turn is significantly easier than 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So this is where I felt like I've made the most intentional choices to push the power level of my deck down, and one of those is one that I'm really excited about as an include in the deck is Invasion of Innistrad, a battle. It's 2 mana it's 2 black for a battle. Siege, which is the only type of battle in Mythic, with 5 defense counters. Defense counters? Is that what they're called?
Sure. 5, things.
5 things.
Hit
yep,
points.
5 hit points, 5 health counters. 5, Okay, anyways, it has Flash, which is great because I love interacting at instant speed. And it says, when Invasion of Innistrad enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -13/-13 until end of turn. And then, if you can get rid of all of the battle points, all 5 of them, it flips.
I looked it up. It's defense counters.
I was right. Defense counters. Get rid of all the defense counters. You get to cast Deluge of the Dead, which is an enchantment that says, for free, which says, whenever Deluge of the Dead enters the battlefield, create 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. And then you can pay 2 and a black to exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So it has some zombie synergy on the backside and additional zombie synergy with some graveyard hate that you can use as a mana sink later in the game to create zombies, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I think this is a great include for your deck. If it was just the front side, this is probably too low power to play, right? 2 black. Give something -13/-13 at instant speed is probably just not going to get there. But the backside is great, and it's so thematic and synergistic for your deck, it really brings it to the right power level.
That's what I think, too. I do think 4 mana for interaction might be a little low for what I want. That just removes a single creature. It doesn't have very much flexibility, but this does grant a lot of flexibility because that removal can open up a path for me to get through and deal and flip this to remove something and get 4 power and toughness worth of stats on relevant creature types on my side, right?
That you can sacrifice to Wilhelt.
That I can sacrifice, that are on 2 different creatures that I can sacrifice to Wilhelt.
Yep.
So it's one that I feel like hasn't been a power level outlier, right in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
I hope people understood that I said power level outlier. I said that very quickly and muddled.
Power level outlier.
Yeah, power level outlier. But is one that I consider to be very middle of the road. The other one I think is Murderous Rider / Swift End. Murderous Rider is 1 black for a 2/3 zombie knight with lifelink, and when it dies, you put it on the bottom of its owner's library. And then it has an adventure, which is Swift End, which is 1 black for an instant adventure. Destroy target creature or planeswalker, you lose 2 life. So still a decent rate for removal. 2 black pips is pretty tough. But it does hit 2 types of things, and I can cast it, and then later get a fun creature on the board to help me gain some life, and to be able to sacrifice to Wilhelt later. Not the most efficient card in the world, but very fun and thematic in a zombie deck.
It's the synergy that brings up the power level. Murder is generally a lower power level card, but this is murder plus a zombie, and that makes it great for your deck. It's perfect.
Yep, absolutely. And I feel like offsets, because I do run a couple better pieces of interaction, right?
Yeah.
And so to keep it mid-power, I did feel like I had to run some 2-mana interaction in the deck that was a little better.
Sure.
But I think that leads us to some of the cards that might be power level outliers in the deck, some of the most powerful effects in the deck. And
they're good.
They're pretty good. The first one of these being Raise the Palisade. Raise the Palisade is a card from Lord of the Rings that I should have seen coming. It's very effective. Very effective, very good. 4 and a blue for a sorcery. Choose a creature type, return all creatures that aren't of the chosen type to their owner's hands. When I first read this card, it felt like Aether Spouts, kind of, like that type of effect, and it wasn't going to be that good. It turns out it's like
not Aether Spouts.
Nope, it's Baby Cycrift is what it is.
It
right?
is Baby Cycrift. Yeah, and it's so good, and I like this as interaction for a deck, especially one that's very creature heavy. Board wipes, an excess number of board wipes can cause games to drag on and on and on. I always kind of roll my eyes after like the 3rd or 4th board wipe in a game because I'm like, we're all rebuilding again. This game has already been going on for an hour. But with Raise the Palisade, it's so efficient, and in a creature-heavy deck, sometimes it just ends the game because you bounce everyone creatures, and then you have an Alpha Strike, and you just kill everybody.
Yeah, especially in a creature-heavy deck that is a typal deck, right?
Yeah.
Because all of my creatures are zombies for the most part, and so I am left with an entirely full board if this resolves. Another one here that I think we've marked as a power level outlier is Kindred Discovery. We talked about this in some previous episodes. It is objectively probably one of the best card draw effects, especially in typal decks and decks that can abuse it.
Yeah. I mean, in typal decks, you're abusing it so hard. And in Wilhelt especially, because your zombies die into decayed zombies. So you're getting the draw trigger twice.
Yeah, so if I have 5 zombies, including Wilhelt, and I just attack with all of them, and all 5 of them die, Wilhelt only cares about other zombies dying.
You'll draw
baseline,
9 cards.
I draw 9 cards, right? 5 from attacking, and then 4 from the decayed zombies entering. It's so good, especially because I can cast Kindred Discovery and then do that, right? Like it's not, I don't have to wait till the next upkeep. It's just a very powerful refill effect that also sticks on board as an engine and turns my zombies into cantrips later.
Which, in a zombie deck, it's very easy to get zombies back onto the battlefield. So even if someone board wipes, you lose your zombies, they come back, and then Kindred Discovery's still out. So you're just drawing more cards again.
This is easily one of the best cards in the deck, and I only have 1 tutor in the deck that is a zombie, and it's Sidisi Undead the Vizier, 3 black for a 4/6. with Death Touch, I might as well read it here.
Yep.
4/6 Zombie Naga with Exploit, which is when it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. When Sidisi under Vizier exploits a creature, you may search your library for a card, put it in your hand, then shuffle. If I am searching for a card with Sidisi, it is almost always Kindred Discovery.
Yeah.
It's
why would you tutor for anything else?
Yep, it's the best card in the deck.
Yep.
It has made me question whether or not Sidisi or Kindred Discovery should be in the deck.
Sure, because effectively
mid-power.
you're running 2 copies of Kindred Discovery, which is the most powerful card.
Yeah, Kindred Discovery, or 2 copies of Raise the Palisade, or 2 copies of this next card, which is Liliana Dreadhorde General.
Yeah.
A recent acquisition that I think is amazing. And ostensibly, I don't think I used that word correctly. I think I never used that word correctly, and I need to remind myself to not use it. Which counts as 3 things in my deck, right?
Yeah.
It counts as... Should I read it really
I was
quick?
going to say I'll read it really quick.
Yeah,
So
go ahead,
Liliana
please.
Dreadhorde General is 4 black for a 6 loyalty legendary planeswalker Liliana. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. That's the static ability.
Yeah, not non-token, creature.
just
So
a
that means
creature.
a decayed zombie gets to attack into a card, which is
That's
awesome.
wild. So her +1 ability is create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Great in Wilhelt.
Awesome.
-4 is each player sacrifices 2 creatures. This is generally what you're doing when you play this card. It's great. And then the -9 is each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifice the rest, which is just backbreaking.
Yep, which is an awesome win condition. It's -9, so you need this needs to survive at least 4 turns to do that. But if you're
and that's 4
+1ing
turns
into
of
zombies,
only +1ing.
yep, exactly.
Yeah. Because generally when you play this card, you want to immediately downtick it.
Yeah, you
wanna
immediately down
do
tick,
-4.
which is virtually a board wipe into drawing 2 cards, which is awesome.
That's great.
So this counts as thematic because it's creating zombies, cares about zombies.
Yep.
It counts as card advantage because it's drawing me cards when my creatures die. And it counts as interaction because it's making other people sacrifice creatures and affecting the board state in some way. So it really ticks
perfect
a
for the
lot
deck.
of boxes. It's so good.
And it's powerful, but I mean, this is the deck that you play it in. It's okay that it's all decks are going to have a top end of their power level.
Yep.
And how cool is it that the top end of your power level is so thematic for the deck?
Yeah, it's one that I'm really happy that I acquired for the deck and was reprinted recently, so I could require it at a somewhat reasonable price. And it is 6 mana, right? It is, like you're saying, it's the top end. It's the biggest thing I'm casting in the game to give me a good advantage.
Yeah, I don't think you don't have anything over 6 mana in this deck.
Nope, it is. Yep, 6 mana is the cap with this deck. If I could get my hands on a Rotcleaver, it might be 7, but that's a pretty expensive card that I don't think they're going to reprint anytime soon.
So we talked about some of the most powerful cards that you're including. There are some cards that you have not included, specifically either because it's too powerful or it doesn't fit well into the theme of the deck.
Yeah, the first one of those being Phyrexian Altar. When I first acquired this it went straight into Wilhelt, or my zombie deck contemporary at the time, because of how it interacts with Gravecrawler. Thank you. So Phyrexian Altar is I should probably pull it up, but I'm going to try to do it from memory here, and you can correct me, is a 3 mana artifact that says sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana of any color.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome. Gravecrawler is a 1 mana zombie creature, 2/1, with the abilities Gravecrawler can't block, and you may cast Gravecrawler from your graveyard as long as you control a zombie. So there are a lot of zombies that care about zombies either dying or entering the battlefield, and they will either ping an opponent or ping all of your opponents and deal damage to them. So if you have one of those zombies out and Gravecrawler and you get a Phyrexian Altar, you can sacrifice Gravecrawler to the Phyrexian Altar for 1 black, then use that black mana to cast Gravecrawler, infinitely looping and dealing damage to your opponents.
And you can also just create infinite decayed zombies with Wilhelt.
Yeah, you also just get infinite decayed zombies. And if you have Kindred Discovery out, you get to draw your whole deck. If you have Liliana out, you get to draw your whole deck. There's lots of things. It just that infinite ETB, LTB, and being able to cast a zombie is relevant in the deck in a lot of ways. And one of the reasons I didn't include it in the deck, because I don't want to just happen to... I mean, I do play the 1 tutor in the deck, and so I could go find that. I'd rather go find one of my cool, exciting advantage engines that's explosive in the deck than just outright win the game.
Yeah, sure. That's not the experience that you're looking to have with a mid-power game and a mid-power deck.
Yep, exactly. And the other two cards here, I'm going to talk about them at the same time, are, I guess we'll have to read them. But the first one is Toxic Deluge. Toxic Deluge is, I'm going to pull it up here. Sorry, I should have had that one ready here. Toxic Deluge is 2 and a black for a sorcery that says, as an additional cost to cast a spell, pay X life. All creatures get -X until end of turn. An incredibly efficient board wipe, one of the premier board wipes in Commander because it's 3 mana. And can effectively act as a one-sided board wipe if your creatures are bigger than everyone else's, or you're just trying to hit a couple targets and make at least one of your creatures live. It's a very powerful effect. The other one here is similar.
I can read this one. This is the Meat Hook Massacre. This is X black for a legendary enchantment. When the Meat Hook Massacre enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. So X was in the casting cost. And whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain a life.
A very, very good and powerful card. Both of them were very powerful board wipes. And because this deck is trying to be a controlling deck, I like running those. And the Meat Hook Massacre was especially relevant because I do care about my creatures dying, right?
Yeah.
And so it gets the additional benefit of draining my opponents and being another one of those pieces to drain as my zombies die. And then the last one here, we didn't talk about this one, but was also in the deck and I've taken out as a part of trying to get this deck to the right level, was an Offer You Can't Refuse, which is 1 blue for an instant. Counter target non-creature spell, its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. One of the premier counter spells in Commander because it hits everything except creatures, right? It's awesome for 1 blue mana. What this brings my total to in the deck previously was 18 pieces of interaction in the deck, which I found to make the deck a little too controlling.
And a lot of those were counter spells.
And a lot of them, just an Offer You Can't Refuse. And so I only have, I think, 3 counter spells in the deck.
Sure. You said previously it brought you to 18. You used to have more counter spells in the deck.
I think yes, but my previous iteration before even today was still 18 with only the addition of an Offer You Can't Refuse, Meat Hook Massacre, and Toxic Deluge.
Oh, and Toxic Deluge. Yeah.
So it took me to 18, which is still only like 3 counter spells, but that was 2 additional board wipes, which I think I already have like 3 or 4 that can kind of turn into one-sided board wipes, and made the deck just significantly better because it is trying to be very controlling.
Yeah.
And so those I took those out because it felt like it made the deck do what it was trying to do just a little too well and brought it above the power level that I wanted.
And that's not to say that you can't play an Offer You Can't Refuse at a mid-level power deck. It's a totally appropriate card for that power level. It doesn't fit into the way that your deck was synergizing and the kind of strategy and play pattern that you wanted to have with your deck.
Yeah, I think the reason I took out those that one specifically as well is that the deck synergizes quite well and does a lot of things very well, and I felt that removing one of the more efficient interaction pieces for maybe a less efficient draw piece in the deck, because I was trying to hit our target of like 13 draw pieces or card advantage pieces, would help my deck not only perform better and also perform more consistently at the power level I want, and have less inevitability at a mid-power playgroup.
Yes, because you are drawing so many cards. If you always have a counter spell in hand, if you always have a lot of interaction in hand, it can start to feel inevitable.
Yep, exactly. At that power level. At higher power levels, you want that, right? You want to be controlling and trying to win the game. But at a mid-power, I feel like you want there to be some chance of other people to take over and win the game, right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Spencer, for walking us through Aber Zombie and Lich. Like we said, we'll put the link to the Moxfield list in the show notes, so you can find it there. You can also just find a link to our Moxfield on our channel's homepage on YouTube. But thank you all for listening. That is going to be our show for this week. We appreciate all of your support. Please like, subscribe, follow wherever you find us. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll have a new episode next week. Please join us. This is the end of our power level series. Like we said, if you haven't listened to the previous videos, they are worth a listen. We go into a lot more depth and detail on our power level process and what word am I looking for here? Our philosophy.
Our paradigm.
Yes, exactly. So we go into a lot of detail in that in the first video, and then we break down each vegetable, ramp, card draw, and card advantage. But we will have new content starting next week.
Yep, and we're going to be trying to disseminate that information into some documents. We're going to be posting those on our website sometime in the next few weeks. That's going to be a little more time consuming than recording the episodes.
Sure.
We're always trying to get out content weekly, so please be patient with us as we get that out. But please listen to the episodes. But if you're looking for a reference, we're going to try to put a reference out there to be available for all of you. Thank you so much for always interacting with our videos. We appreciate every comment. We appreciate comments that are saying, wow, we agree with this. We think it's so amazing. And we also appreciate all the comments that are, well, I don't know about that. We love hearing your opinions. We love the discourse that you have all created in our channel. It has been amazing to watch. Thank you for always keeping it positive. Please be kind to each other. We have just loved the community you've all been building, and we just hope to continue doing that as more of you subscribe and as we hit more benchmarks and are able to do this more and more. So thank you everyone for listening. Please check us out on the commanderpod.com. That's where those references will be. If you're on YouTube, keep listening there. We're also on Spotify. Keep listening there if you're listening there. You can find us anywhere. We're going to be on Apple Podcasts, hopefully at some point. We're trying to continue to expand the platforms we're available on. Thank you for joining us. Please tune in next week. We're excited to move on. We've loved talking about power levels. We're excited to move on to some other content as well. So please be looking forward to that. Tune in next week. And until then, remember to always pay the one.